Well, I'm Roger Engstrom, and welcome to the Museum Roadshow. Today we're down here at the Becker County Fairgrounds at the Little Red Schoolhouse, and we've talked to some former teachers and students about what it was like to go to the country schools. These were the way the 3 R's were learned 60 plus years ago, and there's a lot of interesting stories that go along with these little country schools that now stand abandoned on the countryside.
It seemed like I was always boarding in a house where I would be a mile away from school. I had to board in the district. My folks were on one area, and the school I was going to teach was maybe 10, 12 miles from them. Well, I didn't have a car at that time, and I couldn't drive back and forth. And in some areas, the rule was that you had to live in the district. So I was fortunate enough to live and get into homes that, I got so well fed, and we'd play games and have a good time in the evening with the family. And I'd walk that mile home, and I'd always have a bag of papers to check too, but after that we could have a little relaxation and visit and play games. And of course in the wintertime, well, it was lovely in the fall and in the spring, but in the wintertime I'd have to get up in the dark and get ready to go and to get this walk ahead of me. So it took a while to walk to school. Some mornings there was a lot of snow, and I'd have a terrible time getting through that. But I would be alone. I'd get to the schoolhouse real early, be sure that the fire was going. Sometimes we would have a janitor, but he wouldn't start until it was really cold, and he would be through, of course, in the early spring, and then I would build a fire and get the room nice and warm and comfortable and chase the mice out. There were mice that got into the schoolhouse too, and they weren't welcome. And then on the way to school sometimes some of the children would be up and at 'em too. They'd be anxious to get to school. That wasn't in the real cold weather, but in the early fall, they'd like to come, and then they would have games. They'd gather together, the ones that came with me and those that came from the other direction and those that came from a different direction. They'd all meet and play baseball for a while. And it was pretty hard to stop them in the morning when the bell rang at 9 o'clock. They were having such a good time, but it was wonderful to see their spirit.
The first year I stayed with an old Englishman who was very crabby, and he had an English housekeeper. She slept downstairs in the living room, so we never got to go near the living room. And I shared an upstairs bedroom. The house was divided in half. The old man slept on one side, I slept on the other. And it was so cold. It was the worst winter we've ever had. We had snow on the 18th of September, and it never left. And when I went home at Thanksgiving, I brought home a woolen cap and my brother's woolen stockings and all the clothes I could find. And that's how I went to bed at night. And I was so glad when I could walk down to the school and fire up the stove and warm it up for the kids. I walked, the first year I didn't walk so far, but I couldn't stand to be there for the second year, so one of the other parents invited me to come and stay at their house. They had 2 students, one in 5th grade and one in 7th grade. And I had to sleep in a room upstairs where the little draft going through, it wasn't really heated, but it was better than what I had been in. And in the wintertime, a lot of the kids didn't know this at all. My 10-year-old students slept with me in the wintertime. The other kids would never have, they wouldn't have thought much of that. But anyways, we did. But then I had a mile and a half to walk to school. And I always wore heels and shoes. And then I'd have to shovel the snow away from the door in the wintertime. And then I'd have to stoke up the fire because we had a stove that burned coal and wood. And get the fire going. And then they had a shed on the back where the men, then the school board, brought in the coal and the wood, so I didn't have to go and chop my own wood.
Kids were responsible for getting the there was like a coal room they would have where they'd have the coal in that, and the bigger ones would help with the stove during the school day. And there was a water cooler, and we had to go pump from the pump to get our water put in this little water cooler.
You had a coal stove, we had a wood stove. So we had a kind of an entryway like on this building out there that was filled with cordwood, and the kids had to carry the cordwood in, stack it in that building, and then in the wintertime we would bring it in and get it ready to go in the stove. So they kept us busy. Yeah,
they did. The kids did a lot of the work around there. They you know, washed the blackboards and pounded the razors, and we had like little lamps. You know, if they had like maybe if it was gotten dark before school let out, you know, they have little like kerosene lamps that hooked up onto the walls, you know, and then we had to clean the chimneys and sweep the floors.
Well, I think the one-room schoolhouse was a good experience, and I think we had some good teachers. It's really nice that I've kept in contact with my first grade teacher, Dorothy Bradley, and it was a good experience.
A little bit of a side interest here. This week I had the opportunity to visit with Grant Johnson. Grant Johnson is a former superintendent in Detroit Lakes who was here at the time that they assimilated a lot of the local country schools into the Detroit Lakes system. And he was commenting on how he brought in some of the country school teachers into the town schools, and that they turned out to be some of his very, very best teachers. It was kind of interesting. And one of them is Dorothy.
We ran out of time this week, so we'll look next week for more stories about the country schools.